So after getting finally caught up on Daredevil, I've decided to go back and finish rewatching and watching the Mission Impossible movies and trying to get them all done before Final Reckoning comes out this May. So this is my review for Mission Impossible 2 from 2000. This film was directed by John Woo, who is an absolute legend when it comes to action film. This is the guy who directed Face Off, but real ones know him as being this legendary cinematic Hong Kong filmmaker who did classic movies like Hard Boiled and The Killer and A Better Tomorrow. If you have not seen these movies, if you're watching this review and you want to see, I guess you can call it a bullet storm type of film, if this is the type of movie you like, you have got to check out some of John Woo's Hong Kong films. He was doing things in the early 90s and the 80s that kind of like, okay, this was John Wick before John Wick. He was doing those types of movies way before anybody else was and doing them with a certain style. So having him direct the Mission Impossible movie makes sense. However, this movie is not really regarded as a favorite. Most people I talked to told me this is the worst one. Not saying it's bad, but it's the worst one compared to the other 5 or 6. So I guess we'll find out as we go through. This is my first time seeing Mission Impossible 2 since it first came out, because I did see it all the way back in 2000. It is the sequel to the first 1996 Mission Impossible movie. Tom Cruise is back as Ethan Hunt. He's accompanied by Ving Rhames, John Poison, Doug Ray Scott, Richard Roxburgh, a whole bunch of people for this next chapter of the story. Now, the basic plot of this movie is about this virus, this disease called Chimera. And this disease, Chimera, is extremely dangerous. It's sort of like, and it's crazy that this movie came out literally 20 years before we actually had a global pandemic. The difference, and some would say it's not so different, is that this was genetically engineered in a laboratory and meant to be used as a biochemical weapon, and it's up to the crew to stop it from spreading and saving civilization itself. So the first thing I want to get out of the way is the action sequences. They're great. I don't know if there's any sequence in this movie that really can touch the helicopter train scene from the first one. John Woo goes for a different approach because unlike Mission Impossible 1, Mission Impossible 2 sort of feels, you can see the Hong Kong influence. You can see in the way he dynamically directs the film, the way he transitions from scene to scene, the credits, like the way he just does everything is his own style. But the way this movie is sort of patterned out, instead of it being this huge, giant spectacle at the end, and there is a lot of that in the film, it ends with basically this motorcycle battle. Now, the problem with the motorcycle battle is that, and actually, Hard Boiled has a couple scenes very similar to this one, which I find funny. Again, you got to watch those movies. Is that while the motorcycle battles can be thrilling, the one in this movie I think suffers from some really weird edits. I think that there's a lot of cutting around. It kind of reminded me of some of the issues with Batman Begins, how when Batman is fighting criminals, there's a lot of cutting away and cutting around, and so it becomes kind of dizzying. And parts of this movie have that issue. And I wonder if John Woo, if he were to go back and re-edit the film, if he would make this decision again. I think this kind of hurt the movie a little bit. I think the main problem with the movie is that I don't think that the characters are really all that interesting. And that may be due to the screenplay from Robert Towne. Not to say that they're all boring, because that's not what I'm saying either, but it seems like this movie, when I got done watching it, the first thing I said was, this is a generic action picture. That's what this is. It's a generic action film. Not saying it's bad, because it's not. But it's sort of the type of movie that has a budget to do crazy things. And obviously, Tom Cruise is likable as Ethan Hunt as a protagonist. And there's a lot of different characters they interweave into the story, but it doesn't stick out. It doesn't sort of stand out. The espionage side of it really dominates the first half or so, I think, and it's well done. But the movie at a couple points kind of forgets what it is, and kind of leans more into a spectacle. The fight on the beach with the motorcycles really did feel like something out of a different series. It definitely stands out, and I am curious when I go back and after I see the rest of them, when I go back and see how that finale, and when I say stands out, I don't mean it's better, it sticks out because it's so different than the first film. And when I go back and kind of revisit all these movies, I wonder how I'll feel about it. Because maybe the fact that it's different might actually be beneficial. But like I said, when it comes to like the whole generic action movie, I think the movie lacks substance. I think you could swap out Ethan Hunt for a number of action heroes and it would work the same way. Now, I want to make this clear. I grew up on movies like this. I, being an immigrant kid, not really speaking English, my parents would oftentimes, when I was a kid, rent action movies because movies with a lot of dialogue and a lot of talking that didn't have sort of visuals, we didn't really understand them because we didn't speak the language. There were obviously some films that were subtitled, but not everything. So that because of that, I grew up on Steven Seagal and Van Damme and Arnold and Sly. And I like these types of movies. I mean, I am one of those guys that can appreciate cheesy action films and cheesy action sequences. I can be into that stuff. It's just that with Mission Impossible, maybe it's because Tom Cruise is involved, and Tom Cruise usually tries to elevate his movies to a certain level beyond generic. This is, of course, back in 2000. He had a lot of power back then. Maybe not as much as he has now in Hollywood, but he certainly had it back then. And it feels like maybe the script needed one more touch up for it to really hit. The love interest in the movie, although she is very good looking, is just very one dimensional. Like, it felt like a generic Bond girl. This movie felt like if you take a Bond movie and you just mix it with an 80s Arnold movie. And so that's not necessarily a bad thing. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but with Mission Impossible, the difference between Mission Impossible and Bond is that with Mission Impossible, usually the missions, as it were, are usually a lot more, I guess, with a group effort and a lot more bombastic and in some ways a lot more dangerous. And the character of Ethan Hunt isn't always going around sleeping around with different women. But in this movie, it seems like that's kind of, they were leaning into that Bond type of film. Mission Impossible 2 is absolutely a popcorn movie, more so than the first one. It sacrifices character development for bigger action sequences, albeit different ones as well. And I do look forward to seeing the third one, which is directed by J.J. Abrams. And I remember for a while thinking this was his best movie, Mission Impossible 3. This is the last one, Mission Impossible 3 that is, that I've seen. I have not seen anything past the third one. So, and I haven't seen the third one since it came out. So therefore, I am going into movies 4, 5, and 6, and 7 not knowing anything until, of course, I see them. And that's the fun of doing these reviews, is getting my initial impressions, revisiting or seeing for the first time. Right now, I think I would put Mission Impossible 1 above 2, but I don't think 2 is a bad movie at all. It's just, it doesn't measure up to the first one. And hopefully 3 will maybe recapture that magic from the first one and give us more of the whole suspense thriller thing. This one didn't have as many twists as I was expecting either. I think these movies are very good at doing twists as well. That's a key thing. So what did you think about Mission Impossible 2? Let me know in the comments, and I will see you guys for Mission Impossible 3 from 2006. Take care.